Questions to the Prime Minister. Dr. Roberta Blackman-Wood.
Question number 1, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others, and in addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Dr. Roberta Blackman-Woods.
The Intergenerational Fairness Index published this week shows that prospects for young people have deteriorated since the Conservatives came into government. So can the Prime Minister explain why he is reducing opportunities for young people further by removing the maintenance grant from poorer students, thereby reducing their opportunities or increasing their indebtedness?
Well, first of all, we're increasing opportunities for young people by making sure more young people have a job. And yet again today we see another decrease in youth unemployment, down 13,000 on the quarter and 92,000 on the year. In terms of students, we've now got record numbers of young people going to university, and because of the action we're taking, we're able to take the cap off the university numbers and see an increase in many more people going. In terms of replacing loans with grants with loans, this is the right approach. Interestingly, it was the approach taken in 1997 when the Right Honourable Lady sat in the Cabinet.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's bad enough that in the latest figures I have, there are 363 murderers in open prisons, and that 106 murderers have absconded from open prisons in the last 10 years. But these figures also show that there are 179 offenders in open prisons who have previously absconded from an open prison. Will the Prime Minister give a commitment to ensure that nobody who has ever absconded from an open prison is ever allowed back into an open prison?
Prime Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for his question. I know he takes a very keen interest in this, and I will examine his proposal. I can tell him we have already overhauled the process for allowing prisoners out on temporary licence, and that's led to a 39% drop in the number of those who breach their licence conditions. We've also seen the rate for prisoners who escape from prison have reached a record low, but as I understand it, prisoners with a history of escape or absconding on temporary lease are prevented from transfer to open conditions other than in the most exceptional cases. What I will do is look at these exceptional cases and see whether there is the sort of case for the blanket ban that he talks about, and I'll write to him over the summer.
Harriet Harman.
Mr. Speaker, it's important that a deal on Greece has now been reached. The economic trauma that the people of Greece are going through is on a scale unprecedented in Europe since the end of the Second World War. The agreement should be implemented in a way that is fair to the people of Greece, as well as being acceptable to the creditors. It's being reported this morning that the IMF are concerned about whether the deal for Greece is in fact sustainable. Can the Prime Minister tell the House whether the Chancellor has had discussions with Christine Lagarde about how these concerns can be addressed?
Minister.
Well, I think the Right Honourable Lady is absolutely right to raise this, and I think we all feel for the Greek people who have had a very difficult time and with no early signs of relief on the way. We talk to the IMF on a very regular basis. The point they're making, that there needs to be debt relief for Greece, must be right. The problem is at the heart of the Eurozone is an argument about whether this is a single currency where you have to look after each other's debts and you have a fiscal union and a banking union and a social union. That's one view. Or whether you have the view that the single currency has very strict rules and can't deal with these things. Frankly, it's in our interest for the Eurozone to resolve these issues. We're not involved in the debate directly because we're not in the Euro, but we do need them. And we're not going to join the Euro. But they need to resolve these issues, and they need to resolve them quite fast.
Harriet Harman.
It is important that the deal is sustainable, and it's interesting to hear the Prime Minister's view about a measure of debt relief is being necessary. Does he agree, though, that with President Putin waiting in the wings, this is about more than just economics? It's got wider geopolitical significance. What's his view about that?
Minister.
I think the Right Honourable Lady is absolutely right. Greece is a member of the European Union as well as a member of the euro. It is a friend and ally of Britain. We're NATO members. We're trading partners. It's not for Britain to bail out Eurozone countries, and we wouldn't do that. But as a member of the European Union, if Greece were, for instance, to leave the euro and wanted humanitarian assistance, I'm sure that this House and the British public would take a more generous view. But sorting out the problems of the Eurozone, which we've always warned about the dangers of this Eurozone, is a matter for Eurozone countries. But she's right about the dangers of Russian involvement.
Harriet Harman.
Of course, what happens in the Eurozone affects this country, and therefore it's important that we are fully engaged. Turning to the budget, we're all concerned to see today's rise in overall unemployment, but for those in work, the Chancellor said that his changes on pay and tax credits will make working families better off, but they won't. The Institute for Fiscal Studies have now made it absolutely clear that the idea that a higher minimum wage will compensate for the loss of tax credits is arithmetically impossible. So will he now admit that as a direct result of his cuts to tax credits, millions of working families on low incomes will be worse off?
Prime Minister.
Well, first of all, let me comment on the unemployment figures. And she's right, there are mixed messages in these figures. It's disappointing that the claimant count has gone up, having fallen for so many months in a row and still being at the lowest level since 1975. But long-term unemployment is down, youth unemployment is down, the rate of employment for women is at a new record high. And interestingly, when you look across the last year, you can actually see that all of the rise in employment in the last year has been people working full-time. And interestingly, in light of the debates we had in the last Parliament, wages are up by 3.2% in these figures, compared obviously with the inflation figures yesterday that were zero. Now, in terms of the budget, I remember her asking me from that dispatch box and making the point that reforming welfare wouldn't work unless we increased minimum wages by a quarter. Well, I can tell her we're not going to. We're increasing them by a third through the national living wage.
To accept the fact, which has been absolutely clearly established by the Institute for Fiscal Studies, that the minimum wage increase will not compensate for his cuts in tax credits. And that takes me to another claim the Prime Minister made about the budget. He said that he would protect the most vulnerable. Well, you're obviously vulnerable if you have a condition like Parkinson's or you're being treated for cancer. The changes in the budget mean that the support people like that will be cut from £100 a week to £70. We agree that the deficit needs to come down. But what kind of government is it that thinks the way to do that is to hit people who, through no fault of their own, are suffering from life-limiting illnesses? That's what his budget is doing.
Prime Minister.
Well, first of all, let's deal with the effects of this budget. And let me give her the figures. A family with 2 children where both parents work full-time on the minimum wage, they will be better off by 2020 by a full £5,500. I don't think the party opposite has fully grasped the importance of this national living wage. They fought an election on it being £8 by the next election. It's going to be over £9 by the next election because of the action of this government. Now, she wants to ask questions about welfare, and I welcome what she said. She said this week, we won't oppose the welfare bill, we won't oppose the housing benefit cap. She said we won't oppose restricting benefits and tax credits for people with 3 or more children. I welcome that. What a pity that the rest of her party doesn't agree with her. Now, she asked specifically about employment and support allowance, and I think this is really important we get this right. There are 2 groups of people on employment and support allowance. There's the support group who will continue to get extra money, more than on job seekers allowance, and will continue to get that for as long as they need it. In terms of future claimants in the work-related activity group, existing claimants keep the existing amount of money, but for new claimants, I think it's right that they should get the same amount as job seekers allowance and then get all the help that we give to job seekers to help them into work. People ask why. I'll tell you why. We want to get people into work. We want to give people a chance. We want to give people a life. That's what this budget was all about.
talks about new claimants, but I don't think he really understands the reality of the situation, because a lot of these people are in and out of work because they want to work, but they can only work intermittently. And every time they go back into work, when they come out of work, they'll be treated as a new claimant. And quite frankly, Mr. Speaker, quite frankly, I don't need to be patronised by the Prime Minister about not understanding the minimum wage. We introduced it. And the fact of the matter is that the IFS says that 3 million families will be at least £1,000 a week worse off. Now, a year. The Minister for Skills was on the radio this morning talking about party funding, saying the government's curbs on trade unions' donations were not an attack on working people and the Labour Party. But it doesn't look that way. There's an issue about big money in politics, but it's got to be done fairly. So will the Prime Minister commit that he will not go ahead with these changes unless it's on a cross-party basis? And will he include the issue of individual donation caps? It's not acceptable for him to be curbing funds from hard-working people to the Labour Party while turning a blind eye to donations from hedge funds to the Tories.
Well, finally, Mr. Speaker, we see where all these questions were going. You know, the Labour Party can go round and round and round, but it always comes back to the trade unions who call the tune. Now, let me answer all the questions. Let me answer all the questions that she asked. First of all, on the national living wage, if the Labour Party is so keen on it, why did they vote against it in the budget last night? Second of all, on employment and support allowance, the number of people coming off job seekers allowance is more than 7 times the number of people who've come off incapacity benefits since 2010. We want to help to get these people back to work. Now she asks about the issue of trade union funding for the Labour Party. I think there's a very simple principle here. If you want to give money to a party, it should be an act of free will, not something that is taken out of your pay packet without you being told about it properly. If this wasn't happening in the trade unions, the Labour Party would be saying this was appalling mis-selling. They would say it was time for consumer protection. Why is there such a blind spot, even with the Honourable Lady, when it comes to the trade union paymasters?
There is a simple principle here. There is a simple principle, which is it must be fair. What he's doing is it's one rule for the Labour Party, but something completely different for the Tories. To be democratic about this, the Prime Minister must not just act in the interest of the Tory party. Instead of helping working people, he spends his time rigging the rules of the game. Now he wants to go even further and attack the rights of working people to have a say about their pay and conditions. And that's on top of already having changed the rules to gag charities and trade unions from speaking out. The Prime Minister says he wants to govern for one nation, but instead he's just governing in the interest of the Tory party.
The law for company donations was changed years ago. The law for trade union donations has been left untouched. But the principle should be the same. Whoever you're giving money to, it should be an act of free will. It should be a decision that you have to take. The money shouldn't be sequestered away from you without being asked. But, Mr. Speaker, today we've seen it all. I thought she was the moderate one, and the leadership contenders were the ones who were heading off to the left. I mean, what we heard from them, they oppose every single one of our anti-strike laws. They oppose every single one of our welfare changes. Some of them even describe terrorist groups like Hamas as their friends. Mr. Speaker, in the week when we're finding out more about Pluto, it's quite clear they want to colonise the red planet.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. On Monday, 2 men were tragically killed in an industrial explosion in my constituency. The families are devastated, and the thoughts of everyone in Norwich are with them and the friends and colleagues of the two workers. The emergency services work tirelessly and investigations are ongoing, including that of the Health and Safety Executive. Will the Prime Minister join me in expressing our deepest sympathy and ensuring that the relevant parts of government do all they can to support my constituents at this difficult time?
No, well, this is a very sad case, and I'll certainly join my honourable friend in sending my condolences and all those in this House to the family and friends of Barry Joy and Daniel Timbers. It will obviously be a very difficult time for the family. No words can do justice to the loss felt by those affected. I understand the emergency services are continuing to investigate the circumstances surrounding this incident to get to the bottom of what happened. There will need to be a proper investigation and proper answers for these families.
Angus Robertson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Rape is a horrific crime, and it is abhorred by MPs of all political parties. The Department of Work and Pensions and HMRC in the government's budget have been asked to, and I quote, develop protections for women who have had a third child as a result of rape or other exceptional circumstances under the Prime Minister's plans to restrict child benefit to 2 children for new parents. Can the Prime Minister explain how this will work?
Prime Minister.
Well, we're very happy to look very closely at issues like this because there's absolutely no intention to penalise people who've been treated in this way. But the principle we are applying is a principle I think set out very, very clearly by the Right Honourable Lady, the leader of the Labour Party, when she said this. And I think actually she puts it extremely well. When I was going around the country talking specifically to women, so often they would say, you know, we've got one child, we'd really love to have another, but we just can't afford it. They're working hard and they feel it's unfair when other people can have families they would love to have. Now we've got to listen to that. I think the Right Honourable Lady was absolutely right. It's something all of us here. But of course, in cases like those he raises, we'll have to look very carefully to make sure that we look after them.
Angus Robertson.
Rape is one of the most underreported serious crimes in the UK. It is believed that 85% of the victims of rape do not confirm that to anybody for a variety of very, very understandable reasons. Women Against Rape have said the following: asking women to disclose very difficult information and expecting them to be able to prove it in what is frankly a very hostile environment when the DWP is trying to take your money away will have appalling consequences. Can I urge the Prime Minister to look again and to think again about what impact his proposals will have on rape victims?
I can reassure the right honourable gentleman because he is reading from the budget book that sets out this issue and the fact that we do need to look very carefully and think about it and make sure that we get it right. At the same time, I'm sure he'd welcome what was in the budget about investing in women's refuges and rape crisis centres to make sure that we look after people who've been suffered this appalling crime.
Andrew Mitchell.
My right honourable friend has indicated over the weekend that he would like to see greater use made of drones in the fight against terrorism. But is he aware that for every terrorist taken out by a drone, between 5 and 10 innocent civilians, especially women and children, lose their lives? Will he accept that as we seek to win hearts and minds in this conflict against the evils of terrorism, we need to bear in mind this effect?
Well, of course, we always have to think very carefully before we act, but the rules of engagement that both Britain and America follow are to limit collateral damage to the absolute minimum. But if he's asking me, should Britain give up the idea of using drones in extremis to take out people that are threatening our country and terrorism on our streets, I would say very firmly no. But I would say something to him that I'm sure we both agree with, which is, as Secretary General Ban Ki-moon said, a missile can kill a terrorist, but it is good governance and strong governments that can kill terrorism.
Yes. Jeffrey M. Donaldson.
Enniskillen, Portadown, Lisburn, Belfast, Manchester, Warrington, Canary Wharf and the Grand Hotel Brighton are all places synonymous with the use by the IRA of Semtex explosives supplied by the Libyan government to maim and murder thousands of innocent people in the United Kingdom. The American government have secured compensation from the Libyans for the victims of state-sponsored terrorism. In light of the recent political agreement in Libya, will the Prime Minister now commit to press the case for UK victims of state-sponsored Libyan terrorism to be given compensation as well?
First of all, let me commend the honourable gentleman for raising this issue time and time again. He's absolutely right to do so. The fact is that it was Libyan Semtex that was used and frankly could still be being used by dissident IRA groups because there was so much of it delivered by Colonel Gaddafi and his hateful regime. Yes, we have raised with the Libyan government in the past this issue, trying to seek compensation, and when there is a Libyan government, there is not yet one in place, we will certainly raise it again.
Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, thousands of my constituents, millions of Londoners and visitors to London were severely inconvenienced by the pointless tube strike. They will all welcome the government's published proposals for changes to trade union laws. But will my right honourable friend go further and actually state to this House and the people of this country that strikes in essential services should be absolutely the last resort and not a negotiating tactic?
Whole country will agree with my honourable friend. These should only ever be a last resort. And frankly, when it comes to the London tube services, the people driving these trains are well paid, they're getting a pay rise and the chance of a bonus. And I think it is absolutely right that we publish this trade union bill today and we take these important steps, that we say that a strike should not go ahead unless there's a 50% turnout, and that in essential services there should be an additional threshold of 40% support for the strike. Now, I know that the party opposite won't like this, but the fact is, and they talk about thresholds, people affected by this, he says I wouldn't have elected on that threshold, the fact is this, people affected by these strikes don't get to vote. That is why it's right to have these thresholds, and I think the whole country will see a Labour Party utterly in hock to the trade unions, and they'll see a Conservative government wanting to sort this out for hard-working families.
Alistair MacDonald.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And could the Prime Minister will be aware of the vicious disorder that we saw in Belfast on Monday of this week, where police officers were seriously injured and a 16-year-old girl was left hospitalised as a result of disgraceful violence relating to parading. A car was driven intentionally and malevolently at a protest group. Will the Prime Minister join with me in calling for the loyal orders to accept the genuine offer of residents, particularly those in Ardoyne, to engage in direct and meaningful dialogue and to reach an honourable solution to the dispute that exists there, and hopefully with it other disputes around parading?
Well, first of all, I absolutely agree with the honourable gentleman that those sorts of scenes are deeply damaging to Northern Ireland's reputation and to Northern Ireland's future, and we all want to see these situations sorted out and not occur in the future. I mean, overall, this year's 12th of July was overwhelmingly peaceful, a peaceful celebration in most areas of Northern Ireland, but what happened in the north of Belfast is not acceptable. I agree with him that where it's possible for people to get together and solve these problems, of course, that is the best thing that can happen, but in the meanwhile, obviously, the Parades Commission need to be properly they are the ones that run the adjudication process.
Gottman.
Can I welcome the recent announcement in the budget that this government is pledging an extra £8 billion for the NHS in England? Lanson Medical Centre in my constituency in North Cornwall has been waiting 2 years for the green light for the expansion. Can my right honourable friend provide me with an update regarding the progress of their bid?
I think my honourable friend is absolutely right that the 8 billion, effectively 10 billion when you think of the 2 billion already put in for this Parliament, that is a real vote of confidence from this government into the NHS and money that will make a real difference. I know that he's been campaigning to expedite the situation at the Launceston Medical Centre. I'm told by NHS England it is a priority development. I hope that perhaps it can form part of the work we're doing to create a genuine 7-day NHS, 7 days for people to access the NHS and always get the same levels of high-quality treatment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. GP practices across Sheffield serving patients with complex and therefore more costly health needs are threatened by the withdrawal of the minimum practice income guarantee and the personal medical services premium. Will the Prime Minister ask NHS England to review the impact of these decisions to ensure that no practice should close? And will he ask health ministers to meet with me and other Sheffield members to consider what can be done to support effective practices?
Well, I'm sure that the Secretary of State for Health and his team will listen carefully to that and see if they can speak to the honourable gentleman. What's happening in his city is the number of GPs is actually increasing. This year, NHS Sheffield Clinical Commissioning Group is getting £708 million, which is a almost 2% increase at a time of almost zero inflation. What we need to do is get the negotiations on this contract right. Now, that does mean making some changes over time, but the contract has got to deliver the quality that the patients deserve.
Steve Brine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister is, I know, very aware of the tragic deaths of Corporal James Dunsby, Lance Corporal Craig Roberts and my constituent Lance Corporal Edward Mayer on an SAS selection exercise in the Brecon Beacons 2 years ago this week. Yesterday, a coroner said their deaths were the result of a series of gross failures and a catalogue of very serious mistakes by those involved in planning and running the exercise. Now, obviously, nothing can turn the clock back for those families, but would the Prime Minister ensure the Army Service Inquiry, which will now get underway, does everything it can, while recognising, of course, that we continue to train the best armed forces in the world, to bring whatever changes are needed to prevent this ever happening again and see those responsible are held to account?
Well, I'm sure I speak for the whole House and indeed the whole country when I say our hearts go out to the families of James Dunsby, Craig Roberts and Edward Maher. Having seen at first hand some of the extraordinary things that our special forces do and the bravery of people that volunteer to join and the training they do, I know how vital this is, but it's an absolutely tragic case. I understand the MOD has accepted the failures identified by the coroner and has apologised for these. I also understand a number of changes have already been made to this particular exercise, but we now need to study the coroner's conclusions very, very carefully and make sure that this can't possibly happen again. And I know the Army will also hold its own service inquiry as soon as all the civil investigations have been completed. It's an absolutely tragic case and we will learn from it.
Flynn.
Cardiff has 600, Newport has 400, Rochdale has 700, yet the constituencies of the Prime Minister, the Chancellor and the Home Secretary have a grand total of only 3. Is this a fair and efficient way to locate asylum seekers?
Well, I believe we're operating the dispersal system in the same way that it was operated for many years under the last Labour government. But I'll look very carefully at the points he makes.
Will Quince.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Colchester is not only the oldest recorded town in Britain, it is also the fastest growing. Our claimant count is down 57% since 2010. But we want to go further. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that only with much needed investment in our local road and rail infrastructure can we attract businesses, create jobs and get Colchester moving?
Well, let me welcome my honourable friend to the House, and I remember campaigning with him in Colchester and how much he talked about the importance of these infrastructure schemes. That's why we've asked Network Rail to look at the options for the Anglia franchise, because we want to deliver reduced journey times on the Great Eastern Main Line. We've approved a series of major upgrades to the A12 that are absolutely vital, and I'm sure now that he is speaking up for Colchester, we'll be able to do even more.
Judith Cummins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Secretary of State for Transport has refused to say when he first told the Prime Minister that the electrification of the Transpennine line couldn't go ahead. There is huge concern about this in my constituency and across the north. Was the Prime Minister told about this before the general election, yes or no?
No, I was told about this after the election, as we've set out before. But the point is now we need to do everything that we can to get to the bottom of the overspending and the engineering difficulties that there are. Frankly, we've committed vast sums of money, a £38 billion programme in terms of rail. And I think instead of griping and making these grievances, the whole House should get behind this programme and make sure we get on with it.
With the threat level at an unprecedented high, would my right honourable friend be able to support with the 2% for GDP of the defence budget that we will prioritise no further cuts to frontline forces, as the constituents in Eastleigh have asked me to ask the Prime Minister?
I think my honourable friend is absolutely right, because we'd made the pledge in our manifesto that there'd be no further reductions in armed services, regular armed services numbers, and I think that's absolutely right. But with this 2%, 2%. And with the extra commitment we're making throughout this Parliament, we can now have a strategic defence and security review that looks at options for how to make this country even safer. And the way the Chancellor and the Defence Secretary have set it out is to make sure that we include in this looking at options for counter-terrorism, for intelligence and security, as well as defence assets, to make sure we do everything we can at this time of heightened security to keep Britain safe.
Andrew Gwynn.
A combination of changes made to the state pension in 1995 and 2011 will mean that many women born in the 1950s will not have the kind of retirement that they'd hoped for. Given that senior civil servants, judges and even members of Parliament within 10 years of their normal retirement age have their pensions protected, isn't it time for the Prime Minister to look again at this group of women to make sure that they have fairness in the system?
What I'd say to the honourable gentleman, and I'll look carefully at the question he asked, is it was absolutely right to raise the pension age. It's been one of the most important long-term changes that enables us to go on paying very generous pensions. It's enabled us to have the triple lock, because the triple lock means the pension will always go up by earnings or prices or 2.5%, whatever is the lowest. And if you go down the path that he's suggesting of not changing the pension age, pretty soon you find you can't pay proper pensions. That is always the Labour way. You take the easy way out, you duck the difficult decisions, and then you can't pay.
Andrew Turner.
Is my right honourable friend aware that 120,000 Europeans and 140,000 non-Europeans settled in this country in 2013? Does he agree that the UK government has to control the number of migrants?
Yes, I do, and that is why we took so much action in the last Parliament to cut net migration from outside the European Union. Obviously, inside the European Union, there is the freedom to go and work in another European country. But one of the reasons we're focusing so much on the welfare issue is of the people who come from Europe to the United Kingdom, 60% of them are job seekers. They're not people already with a job. So our proposal of saying you won't get benefits for the first 6 months of being here, if you don't have a job after 6 months, you have to go home, and you have to pay into the system before you get out of the system, those will make a real difference.
This is Emma Lewell-Buck.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My constituent, Kylie Strassenberg, is a home carer on call 6 days a week. She works every single hour God sends, but needs working tax credits to help her make ends meet. Will the Prime Minister be honest with Kylie and admit, with even a higher minimum wage, cuts to tax credits will make her worse off?
Well, there will be care workers up and down the country who are currently on the minimum wage and getting no more than that, who will benefit not least from the 50p increase in the national minimum wage to the national living wage that will happen straight away next year. We're only able to do this because we're cutting taxes for working people, cutting taxes for business, making welfare affordable, and introducing the national living wage. And let the whole House focus on this. Last night, the Labour Party voted against the national living wage. Put that on your leaflets.
Unemployment in Worcester has halved over the last 2 years, and as of today's figures, it is down 2/3 from its peak under Labour. With this one nation government investing in increasing the number of apprenticeships by half, will the Prime Minister back my long-term plan to have 15,000 apprenticeships a year in Worcestershire by 2020?
First of all, let me thank my honourable friend for all he does to support apprenticeships in his constituency. I think there are 4,490 have been created since 2010. But he's right to say the challenge for the future, if we're going to have the number of apprentices and the quality of apprenticeships, that's why it is right to introduce a levy on larger firms so that they get the money back if they invest in apprenticeships, but they have to pay if they don't. I think that will be one of the key ways that we achieve our goal of 3 million apprentices in this Parliament.
Last but not least, Mr. Michael Meacher.
If this is such a great economic recovery, why are wages still 6% below the pre-crisis level of 7 years ago? Why was the growth rate in the last quarter a mere 0.4%? Why has productivity been flat for 5 years? Why is UK investment as a proportion of GDP one of the lowest in the world? And why is the balance of payments in traded goods now in deficit by £100 billion a year?
Well, if he wants to know why, 2 words, ask Gordon. But if he wants to know what's actually happening in our economy, let me tell him. The deficit has been halved from its peak.
Oh, dear Mr. MacDonald, calm yourself, man. Take some sort of soothing medicament. You'll find it beneficial. The Prime Minister.
If he wants to know what's happening in our economy, the deficit is down by half. We've seen the fastest growth of any major advanced economy in 2014. We grew by 3% last year. The economy is 10% bigger than when I became Prime Minister. There are 2.2 million more people in work. And just today you can see inflation at 0, wages growing by over 3%, a 5% cut in gas prices for 7 million customers. I would call that a long-term economic plan that is working. Added to that, just this week, we've introduced a national living wage. We're building a welfare system that rewards work. We're cutting taxes for working people. That is a Conservative Party standing up for working people and delivering on the One Nation agenda.